So in this video we're looking at trigonometry again, and this is very much kind of a follow-on from my first video introducing trigonometry in right angle triangles, but this time I'm going to focus on how we choose which formula to use. So obviously when I did this with you before, I went through actually 9 examples, 3 for sine, 3 for cos and 3 for tan, but each time we did it you knew what formula to use. So to begin with, I'm just going to give you a little summary, and this is obviously going to be there the whole time. Recommend that you copy this down into your notes so that you've got that to refer to. So in the summary, I've got my 5 steps which I talked through before, so that's how we answer the questions, and I will be referring to those when we do the examples in a moment. But really what I want to focus on here in the summary is the 3 formulae. Now you will not be given these in your exam, you do need to learn them. So we've got sine, cos and tan, and here are the 3 formulae written out. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cos is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tan is opposite over adjacent. So those are your 3 formulae. Now, if you're someone like me who's using this all the time, you just know them. And as you go along and as you do more practice, they will kind of get into your brain a little bit more. But say you've left it for a while and then you come back to it, you might forget which one's which. So I've given you a couple of ways of remembering it. First of all, down the bottom here, you can see I've written out the letters. So you can see S for sine, OH, opposite hypotenuse, C for cos, AH for adjacent hypotenuse, T for tan, and then OA for opposite and adjacent. Now, what a lot of people, and you might have heard older students talking about this, they quite often call it SOHCAHTOA. So when you hear SOHCAHTOA, that is what it's being referred to, and that's how you write it out. Now that works for some people, but if you say SOHCAHTOA, it doesn't necessarily help you to remember how to spell it, I think. So you might want to think about another way of remembering it. Now I've given you an example here, and this is basically where I've given you a sentence which then the beginnings of each of the words spell out SOHCAHTOA. So, some old hag cracked all her teeth on apples. So basically it's just a way of you remembering how or what the 3 formulae are. So again, you'll notice some old hag, SOH, which is sine opposite hypotenuse, cracked all her, C for cos, A for adjacent, H for hypotenuse, teeth on apples, tan, opposite, adjacent. Okay? So these are some suggestions. There are different versions of this which you might have heard of, and you might want to make up your own one so it's something that sticks in your mind. But however you learn them, you have to know those 3 formulae. So that's the first thing. If you know the 3 formulae, then that's half the battle. What I'm going to do with you now then is I'm going to go through these 3 examples, and I'm going to talk to you about how to solve them. But the first question is going to be always, which formula am I going to use? So I'm going to slightly change what's written here. So instead of saying just write the formula, we're going to choose and write the formula. So we've got to choose what we're going to do first. So the first step still remains the same. The first step with all these questions is to label the triangle. So if you remember from last time, and I've got an example here labelled up, there's my angle, the hypotenuse is always opposite the 90-degree angle, theta there, there's my opposite side, this is my adjacent. Same principle over here, hypotenuse there, and I've just spotted my right angle is not labelled. So there's my right angle, opposite that is your hypotenuse. This is the angle we're using, opposite that is the opposite, and then the last side next to the angle is the adjacent. Okay? Then we've got to choose our formula. Now, there's 2 ways of doing this. The first way, you can look for a side that you don't have and you don't want. And in this case, that's the adjacent. Now we look at our formulae and we say which is the only formula that doesn't use adjacent. Okay? So looking at the letters here is probably the easiest way. So we've got adjacent with tan, we've got adjacent in cos, cos, but we don't have it in sine, so it must be sine. So that's the first way of doing it. The second way of doing it is by looking at the two sides that you've got or are going to use in the formula. So in this case, we have been given the hypotenuse and we want to find the opposite. So these are the two sides that we're going to be using, and then we look at the formulas and we say, right, which formula uses opposite and hypotenuse? No, no, yes. So therefore it must be sine. Okay? And then we write it out. Sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. And just like I said last time, the more times you write the formula out, the more it's going to stick in your mind. Step 3 then is to fill in the information from the question. So we're going to fill it in. Sine, now sine theta stands for the angle, so we're going to put in 51 degrees, is equal to opposite, which is x, over hypotenuse, which is 12. Step 4, we're going to rearrange, and if you remember, just like last time, all we have to do is multiply by this. So we're going to multiply by the 12, so we get x equals 12 times sine 51, and then we go to our calculator, and if you remember, you must make sure you've got the D or DEG to stand for degrees, okay? So, checking all of that, 12 times sine 51 is, to three significant figures, 9.33, and it's centimetres, okay? Everything else remains the same. The only thing is that we've got to choose our formula. So let's do another example. So, label your sides, step 1. There's your right angle, opposite that, and then is your hypotenuse. There's the angle we're using, this is the opposite, this is the adjacent. Okay, now on this question, we have been given the opposite, we want to find the adjacent, but we know nothing about the hypotenuse. We're not using it, we don't want to find it, so which is the only formula that doesn't have the hypotenuse? Well, I've got hypotenuse here for sine, hypotenuse for cos, but not for tan, so it must be tan, okay? Then we write our formula. Tan theta equals opposite over adjacent, and then we fill it in. And if you do make the wrong choice, you will notice pretty quick, okay? And then you just try another formula, all right? But that, if I was you, I'd stick with the idea of which side do I not want, and then choose your formula based on that. Right, tan theta, theta is the angle, so that's 28 degrees. Opposite is 9, adjacent is y. And remember for this one we can do that switcheroo. So the y goes up there, the tan 28 underneath. So we get y equals 9 over tan 28 degrees. Use your calculator, fraction bar, 9 over tan 28 gives us three significant figures, 16.9, and it's metres. Last example then, we're going to label up the sides. So, there's your 90 degree angle, this is your hypotenuse, there's your angle, that's the opposite, and therefore that must be the adjacent. Now look at this one, we've got both the adjacent and the hypotenuse, and we're finding an angle. We're not finding the other side, we're finding an angle. So we've got these two sides, so it must be the formula that uses opposite and adjacent and hypotenuse. So in other words, it's the one not using opposite. So again, if we look, there's the opposite, there's the opposite. The only one that doesn't use opposite is cos, and we need to use adjacent and hypotenuse, which cos does, okay? So we write out our formula. Cos theta is adjacent over hypotenuse. Cos, in this case, z, is adjacent 5 over hypotenuse 13. And so z equals, now if you remember, this time we're finding an angle, so we have to use the cos inverse button on your calculator. So we press Shift and cos to give us cos with the little -1. Make sure you do that, otherwise you will not get the right answer. 5/13, and we get to 3 significant figures. The answer is 67.4 degrees. Okay, and that is how you do it. So just remember, look for the side that you don't have and you don't want, the one that we're not using, and then if you've written out Socoto or your formulae, however you've done it, you can then choose which formula to use. Everything else then remains exactly the same as I've done in the previous video. Just make sure you do lots and lots of practice and you'll be able to do it. Okay, thank you.